kids about serious issues is not always a cakewalk. Take the issue of dieting. It's a discussion many experts suggest parents skip altogether. Researchers call this the weight talk. But a new study seems to suggest that being candid with your kids about weighty issues like dieting and healthy eating may not be as taboo as once thought. So joining us to continue this conversation, we welcome licensed psychologist Dr. Roxanne Louh to the show. Thanks so much for joining us. We always love having you. We learn such great stuff when you're here.
I enjoy being here. Thanks so much.
Okay, so tell us, what are some of the benefits about talking to your kids? Are there benefits to it?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends on the kid. I think there are certain personality types where it's really contraindicated. I mean, perfectionistic, type A, really driven, really compulsive. Those kids, you really get into a lot of trouble when you start to share the actual number. But for the average kid, should they be defined by it? No. But is it acceptable to share? I mean, I think it can be. I mean, I think what follows is more important than whether we share the number or not. I mean, the truth of the matter is, adolescents in this day and age, kids, they already know if they're struggling with a weight problem, you know, and they're already getting so many messages about it that when they hear one more message when they go into the pediatrician, they're kind of deflated.
How early is that happening now in this generation, though?
6 and 7.
6 and 7 years old.
If not sooner than that, yeah.
I ask a lot of my patients, hey, you know, when was the first time you remember feeling aware of your body, aware of being in your own skin? And believe it or not, I hear 5, 6, and 7, kindergarten.
Wow.
Yeah. But a lot of times, mom and dad are also overweight. And so how does a doctor address that? They come in
Absolutely.
at the same time.
So, I mean, and I think the genetic blueprint is so important too, because, you know, when we sort of blame our child and say, hey, you know, if you really want to lose weight, you need to be avoiding these foods, eating these foods. I mean, I think we ignore the fact that genetics are often 50 to 70% of why a child is overweight. So it's not always within their control. And sometimes we have the genetic blueprint of a distant uncle. So, you know, a lot of parents assume, well, gosh, I'm not overweight. Why is my kid overweight? It must be their lifestyle. And the truth of the matter is they just have a different makeup.
So before we get to the tips, so you're saying you should start really young. Are young kids really aware of body image? Because I think of body image as preteen or a lot older than that.
Very young age. I had a patient actually earlier today who was telling me, I remember in 2nd grade when they were doing the PE weigh-ins, and I was the only kid over a certain weight. All of my friends were much lower, and I immediately became consumed with getting the number down.
Would you agree that some parents, kind of piggybacking off of what Bonnie said, some parents who may have had or still are in the weight struggle, when they have a little one, they put their issues, their issues onto the child, like, okay, well, I am overweight and I don't want my child to be overweight, so they're really, really hard on that child. So do you think the child at a certain age, do they realize what's going on between themselves and mommy?
I find that they just sort of, you know, they live what they see. You know, more is caught than taught with children. You know, so a lot of times, and moms, I mean, unfortunately are to blame for a lot of this, but they're constantly talking about their body weight, constantly talking about what new diet they're on. I mean, I think there's something like 100 million people on a diet right now in our country. You know, our diet industry is amazing.
Let's go through some of the tips, because you have some really good tips on how to handle weight talk. So the first one you talk about is avoid blaming your child.
Yes, avoid blaming your child. So that's the comments that parents unintentionally make. They're not meaning to, right? But hey, you know, if you really want to be losing weight, you need to be getting off the couch. You need to stop eating such and such fattening food, not fattening food. And that really makes the child feel responsible for their weight problem.
So you really don't think the parent realizes what they're saying?
I don't think they really
like,
realize how much and how the child is internalizing it and blaming themselves and feeling so guilty about it. You know, I think we're in a weight-obsessed culture.
Yes, we are.
And I think parents are just trying to protect their kids, but they don't realize they're giving their child a complex in the process.
Definitely.
So I'll wrap these next two up, because you have the goal is health and not size. So you kind of touched on that, but let's also talk about stop talking and do.
Yeah, so I think families, you know, if you have an overweight child or you're really most concerned about it, it's about what message are we sending our child? Am I myself choosing healthy foods before I go for the donuts? Are we going on a family bike ride or family walks? Are we having family dinner together? I think we have to make it easy for our kids to eat smart and to live a healthy lifestyle, and they're going to live what they see. Right? So I think we have to not necessarily talk to them about it. We just have to live it in our home.
All right, well, something else we want to talk to you about. All this week, First Coast News is asking teenagers to open up about their worries, stresses, and other issues that they're facing today. One of those teens stress about is fitting in. Take a listen.
What worries me? So what worries me is that my friends won't like me. I just become completely lonely, be alone.
That worries you?
Yeah.
Well, when he said that, it almost took my breath away. At times, teenagers feel really disconnected. A parent has to be engaged and try to get a sense for whether the teenager is starting to feel helpless and hopeless.
So the things that stress kids out these days is probably a lot different than the things that stressed out our parents. But when it comes to mental health, how do parents know when it's time to seek professional help? Dr. Louh, tell us, how hard is it for kids and parents, and especially parents, to make that decision and make that step?
So hard to tell, you know, with teenagers especially, because they go through all the hormonal changes, they're more moody, they tend to want to isolate and spend time in their room. But I think the biggest difference is that most teens want to isolate from parents and hang out with their friends. True depression isolates from most people altogether. They've lost interest in spending time with their friends. They no longer want to be on the basketball team. There's sort of an overall heaviness and darkness that kind of consumes them, and they've basically become apathetic toward most aspects of life.
So when should a parent know, like if the conversation starts, the conversation between the parent and the child, if it starts to go a certain way, that should be a warning sign that it's time for the parent to actually get some help. What would that conversation sound like or look like?
Hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, feeling as though the child is a burden, and I think an overwhelming sense of lack of investment into their life.
How do you know that's not just a phase, though? Because I know, you know, as kids, they go through phases, ups and downs. How do you know it's not just a phase?
You know,
how long?
A lot of times moodiness will last a couple of days. You know, depressive episodes can last 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, you know, where you're not seeing any engagement in their life. And again, like I said, the biggest difference is friendships. You know, most teens who are not facing depression still want to hang out with their friends. They just don't want to be around their parents. They just don't want to come down to dinner.
This is a really interesting piece that Tegna did all over the country that we're running tonight in the next couple nights. But saying, if my parents only knew, it's amazing how kids will share with someone else and not be able to share with their parents.
Which is why parents need to know what their kids are doing on their phones and in their emails, their messages, and their Facebooks. They need to have a social media account so that they can be friends with their child. That's where we hear it.
All right, well, thanks, Dr. Louh. We always enjoy having you. And tonight, First Coast News at 11 is diving into those differences as part of a 3-part series. So be sure to check it out at 11 o'clock tonight, and you can get a sneak peek into the stories right now on firstcoastnews.com. Well, coming up next, a truly inspirational story. Hear how our next guest lets nothing stand in the way of all of his dreams.
If you've been injured